Even if all of this was set in stone from the start. Even if all of this is what I wanted. Everything is still ahead.
Once upon a time, the Eldian Empire used the power of the Titans to take over the world. Though the king retreated to the island of Paradis, he continued to reign. Tens of millions of Titans wandered, waiting on that island with the power to crush the world. But someone has stolen away the founding Titan. The world is in danger once more. A man has appeared who opposes King Fritz's peaceful world. This man is a rebel against peace, and his name is Eren Yeager.
I know you're probably looking at the title a little crazy thinking, no way it's been a whole year, but it most certainly has. The last chapter of Attack on Titan released on April 9th, 2021, and since then there's been a lot of ups and downs in the community. Depending on where you stand with the ending, you might not even care about Attack on Titan anymore, and if that is the case, well, I guess I'm just glad you decided to click on this video for some reason. On the same day that the manga ended last year, I released my video detailing a potential alternate ending that could have happened if Isayama, for reasons unknown, didn't make changes to his story. Now, it's very clear in that video that the ending I made up was just theoretical. There wasn't a ton of basis to go on there, and I was in no way trying to pose a better ending than the one we got. Now, if you ask me personally, I kind of like the ending that we got. Now, did I always think this way? Not necessarily, which is why I want to celebrate this 1-year anniversary by talking about the manga's ending in a more retrospective manner, since I never really got to say my initial thoughts last year, and I just think it would be really fun. So, what did I think about Attack on Titan's ending? Well, it's a bit of a tough question. First, you gotta understand, I loved Attack on Titan to death when the manga was ongoing. Waiting for those monthly discussions on every chapter was so exhilarating, and there really won't be anything like that for some time, so when the manga ended, I was really hoping it would have this groundbreaking ending that would somehow manage to satisfy everyone, because, I mean, it seemed like the series that could do no wrong, and of course, looking back on it all, I now see how naive it was to think such a thing. Once the ending came out, I quickly realized how vastly different people's views of this series were in terms of where they wanted the story to go. This was actually very critical to why I think the public perception of the ending skewed so negatively. I think everyone was kind of in the same boat as me, where we all had such unreasonably high expectations for the ending because everyone had their own headcanons on how it would play out. Some people wanted Eren to win, and depending on your definition on that, it could mean a multitude of things. I, for one, never truly saw that as a good ending. Sure, it would be dark and different compared to your typical happier ending, but I personally think Isayama found a good middle ground. I have always said this ever since the series ended, that I genuinely believe Attack on Titan is a 10 out of 10 series that ended on a 6 out of 10 chapter, which, upon first impression, it's gonna feel a lot worse than it actually was. When an ending to a series that you've been following for so many years is just okay or fine, your emotions towards it are going to be amplified. I vividly remember the first words I said upon finishing that final chapter. I remember saying, what was so bad about that? because I don't know if you all remember, but before the final chapter actually came out, there were leaks that basically had 5 to 6 sentences that were essentially summing up the gist of the final chapter. And if you just read those sentences as they are on their own with no images accompanying them, it did seem like we were going to get a rough ending. Now, before you assume that I liked the ending from the get-go, let me say I had my own fair share of issues with it, and most of them, they have been alleviated with time, but a lot of my gripes with the ending have to do with questions still being left unanswered, which is pretty par for the course when it comes to Attack on Titan, but even so, an ending should leave you with some sort of closure. There are a lot of little things, like specifically the handling of Ymir, for example. It's one of the things that I could never truly get behind. Ymir has been such a crucial character to this story, and ever since you're introduced to her, you can't help but want to know where she stands in all this. This is just something that I've been questioning over the past year that I don't think I have quite the right answer to, and maybe you all could help me with this in the comments. But in this story, we see Ymir make 3 key decisions of her own free will. The first one being her letting the pigs go in chapter 135, which basically shows us that she, like Eren, also wishes for everyone to be free. The second is when she takes the spear for King Fritz. This one is a bit debatable depending on who you ask, but in the last chapter they do present this scenario as if it was her choice to make. Lastly, she made the decision to disobey Zeke and allow Eren to destroy the world, which begs the question, why the sudden switch up at the end? My own answer to this question is that I guess Ymir decided that because she knew this would be the only way to free her from her endless suffering, that this had to happen. And to me, in my head, it just doesn't feel like a compelling or good enough answer. It's not so much that it couldn't be one, it's just there isn't enough context there for me to feel like, yeah, that is definitely the intention here, or that's definitely the impression we're supposed to get. It's certainly a explanation, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's the right one. The answer is never really said, it's only implied, and it's really all left to interpretation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but this is Attack on Titan we're talking about. It's just so unlike it. This is a series that has consistently been so good at providing answers to questions that feel like the only possible answer to the question. And that was my main glaring issue with the ending. Now, the other issue that I have since completely 180'd on was the handling of Eren's character. As we know, Eren has been put on a path that would inevitably take away his freedom, something he himself doesn't realize until after he kissed Historia's hand. Now, I'll admit it, this completely went over my head when I first read the ending. I wasn't even thinking about any of this stuff, which was a big factor for why I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Eren suddenly unleashing all these pent-up emotions at the end was at first seen as out of nowhere and a bit random. I mean, it was just strange to suddenly see him so vulnerable after all this time, which honestly shows just how well he bamboozled the entire fan base with his Oscar-worthy acting. For some reason, when reading, I saw Eren as just a changed person. You really forget that literally just a few chapters ago, we saw him act just as vulnerable in front of Ramsay. A lot of people got blindsided by this and hate the idea of Eren being this emotional, but when you get right down to it, this makes sense. This has always been him. Eren clearly didn't want to kill all these people, and those of you that somehow see otherwise, I will never understand it. Him laying it all out there about Mikasa was a bit jarring, but only because we rarely ever see Eren reciprocate those feelings. But we all know they're there, and I think the backlash from this was caused by 3 main factors. 1, Isayama isn't really the greatest when it comes to writing romantic tension, and honestly, it's something that I wouldn't say he's necessarily bad at either. It's just really hard to make romance between 2 characters in a world like this feel believable, and like it even has a place in the story. I think the relationship between Historia and Ymir is by far the best in the whole series. I mean, without a doubt. So it's not like he can't do it, it's just easier said than done. The second factor I believe to be the handling of Mikasa's character in Wit's adaptation of Attack on Titan. Now, say what you want about how perfect Wit is, I love Wit to death, but they did Mikasa dirty. In the manga, she had a lot more dialogue, and there was a lot more to her than just
Eren. Eren, 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 Eren.
There's a really interesting thread on Twitter that goes through all of the changes beat by beat, and you should definitely check it out. I'll have it linked below for those that want to see. Now, this last point kind of goes hand in hand with the first one, but honestly, it's the character of Eren himself. We are talking about a character that is predestined to destroy the world. If things were different, I'm sure Eren would have gladly shown Mikasa that he felt the same way. Let me put it into perspective. In Season 2, when Mikasa kind of confesses her love to him, and Eren has a moment, while brief, still a moment, where he's a bit awestruck, and there's definitely something there. I remember when I first saw this scene, I was like, this is a bit weird. Like, there are literal titans right there. What are we doing right now? Then you kind of think back on it, and maybe that's exactly what Eren is thinking too. There is no time for this right now. All I can really do is keep moving forward. Eren doesn't have time to settle down and accept Mikasa's feelings. As the most recent ending theme says, this world is cruel, I still love you. You have to imagine that when he kissed Astoria's hand and saw the fate before him, there was no chance of him ever being with her, which was a hard pill to swallow. If you know you could never get with her, then why would you lead her on? Ever since he received those memories, Eren went through several changes in mindset. Also something that didn't even click right away until I saw the anime. The story being told out of order certainly doesn't help, but there's a clear distinction between all of these points. You see Eren questioning the future multiple times and even expressing different emotions towards the situation. He's upset at the lack of options being given, conflicted by the consequences of his actions, and most of all, he's saddened by the fact that he of all people is not free, the one who wants it most. But if at the expense of his freedom, he's able to grant his friends a long life, so be it. I find it pretty ironic that the Titan that always fights for freedom is never really free. It's crazy, isn't it? It's this complicated and dense array of emotions that are so hard to just convey in a few images. Chapter 131 attempts to present this to you, but it's not very clear upon the first read. There are a lot of shock factor moments in that chapter, and a lot of those images pretty much overshadow what is actually trying to be shown to you. These thoughts that Eren is having, they are very, very dark thoughts. A mental battle that you'd have to imagine he's been having for several years now at this point. And there's not a single point where Eren is ever happy about what he's about to do, which is why it never makes sense to me that people think he actually wanted to commit genocide. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Eren. As for the true ending, you know, those extra pages that came later that everyone hated, well, I actually kind of liked it. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think there are a lot of criticisms that are pretty valid. I mean, do I think that John potentially ending up with Mikasa was a good idea? Not necessarily, but even so, that's not exactly confirmed, and we'd have to wait to see how the anime portrays that scene. So outside of that, I just want to talk about the other stuff. A lot of people, for some reason, tend to forget the state that the island was left in after the rumbling. For the most part, the majority of people left on that island were all Jaegerists, and to them, Eren is a hero, a man who made a great sacrifice so they could all prosper, a symbol for what the Eldian Empire now stands for. No one on that island is exactly fond of what Armin and friends did. They are enemies at the end of the story, and it isn't until 3 years later that they are even able to return to the island, which was only possible because of Historia being the queen and giving them some leeway for negotiations of peace. The group of people who just killed their savior are now coming to the island to vouch for peace. Armin has a tall order ahead of him, and knowing the world of Attack on Titan, it is foolish to think that everything would just go along nicely. Even if agreements are made, there is never a guarantee that peace would last forever. But we can assume that at the very least, there was a brief time of peace. We see that it isn't until long after Mikasa is gone that war breaks out. You can tell by the architecture of the buildings that it has to have been at least another 60 or 70 so years after her death that the island gets bombed. And even several hundreds of years later, that this kid pops up to find what we assume to be another Titan tree. We know this because in order for a tree to get this big, it would have to take hundreds of years. I mean, a lot of people seem to have a problem with this because it apparently defeats the purpose of Eren's sacrifice, which I fail to see because his goal was to make sure his friends got to live long lives, and we can assume based on Mikasa getting to die of old age that it did in fact happen. Armin got to travel the world and live his dream, all because Titans were effectively removed from the world. He removed the curse. They're fine. They got to live the life that was meant for them. So what if Titans can come back into the world? It doesn't downplay his sacrifice in any way. You think Eren had the foresight to think about what the world would be like hundreds of years long after he's gone, long after his friends are gone? He didn't care about that, and what does that even matter? The only way that I could see someone getting mad at this is if they decide to make a sequel series and we find out that the only reason these pages were added was just so they could milk the series. Then I could kind of see where you're coming from. But I don't know. To me, this ending feels very Attack on Titan. And I think watching the final season has really helped put that into perspective for me. As we approach the end of the anime, I start to like the ending even more, and I think anime onlys will enjoy it a lot more than manga readers did for a multitude of reasons. The biggest one being that we have ruined all expectations of a good ending, so thanks for that. Also, the anime has just been knocking it out of the park. I mean, so many chapters are elevated by the anime that I just can't imagine this movie or final season part 3, whatever they're going to call it, not being good. I kind of hope it's a movie just because seeing those incredible final chapters done justice will make for an amazing experience in the theater. Also, the ending that everyone is complaining about will literally be the final 10 to 15 minutes of said movie, and I don't see that overshadowing the amazing 2 hours of crazy stuff that's in it. Seriously, if you remember those last 8 chapters, man, it is a crazy ride. But hey, those are just my thoughts. I hope those of you who watched this video gained some sort of new perspective on things, or maybe even started to think differently about its ending. And in the comments, I want to keep the discussion going, so I'd like for you to tell me where your feelings are now that it's been a year since the manga ended, and do you still hate the ending, or do you think it's not so bad now? Also, let's just spread some positivity in the comments. I want you to post what was your favorite moment in the entire series, the single one that is where, in your opinion, Attack on Titan peaked, and that was when you knew that this was something special. I would actually like to hear people's thoughts on that and talk about it in the comments, so that'd be really fun. Also, I appreciate every single one of you that made it to the end of this video, because I know there's a lot of people that don't want to hear someone praising the ending, so if you did watch it, I appreciate that, and please leave a like so that way this video gets traction. I'd really appreciate it, and yeah, thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.
You left your mark, yeah, you were here. You left your scar and disappeared. I feel